Good morning, church. Happy Easter. I'm standing here in the middle of a cemetery to remind us that on that first Easter morning, life was very different. The truth is that most people were not gathered together that day. They were hiding away in fear. And there was a small group of women that came to a cemetery grieving, as most people do today. Deeply grieving because the one they had loved and lost had died yesterday or the day before and now was silent. And so they came to the cemetery. They came to the tomb looking for that final act of love for Jesus. And through their tears, they wondered about how they were going to roll away a stone. They worried about so many things. What did the future hold? Where was everybody else? They were hiding. Those that had followed Jesus had scattered. The apostles were hidden in a room in Jerusalem. When those women walked into the tomb, expecting to take care of the body of Jesus, they had no idea of what they would find. And what did they find? They came to that cemetery and they found that the stone had been rolled away. They found it was empty. And when they looked in, they found an empty linen cloth. And a messenger there said, "Why do you seek the living among the dead?" It's a great question, isn't it? And how many of us today are hiding away out of fear for our lives? But you know what? I want us to think about the fact that they had a legitimate fear for their life that day. They very easily could have ended up just like Jesus. Their fear was real. And if we're honest, so is ours. And so we're not gathered today. I'm bringing you this message from the middle of a cemetery to remind us that even when we grieve with hope. And the purpose of Easter, while it's wonderful to be together, is really about more than that. It's a story about an empty grave, an empty tomb. It's a story about messengers that were told, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He's not here. He is risen. He's risen from the dead." What did those women make of that? They really didn't know what to make of that, did they? They went back to the city. Most ran ahead, but one stayed behind. And as she wandered through that graveyard, she saw somebody there and went to ask, and through her tears, "What have you done with my Lord? Where have you laid him?" And the response was one word. Her name. Mary. And she recognized his voice. And she knew that it was Jesus. And she wrapped her arms around his leg and wanted to cling to him. But he said, "Don't cling to me, Mary. Go and tell the others that I am alive." And so Mary ran from that cemetery. She ran back to where the disciples were gathered, where they were hiding away. And as she got there, she began saying, "I've seen him. I've seen him. I've seen the Lord. He's alive." And what was their response? Their response was the same response that many people give us still today. "What foolishness is this, Mary? We were there. Some of us watched him die on the cross. You were there. We saw him die. We saw him come down from the cross and be laid in that tomb. No, I'm telling you, he's alive. When the other women said that he wasn't there, Peter and John ran from that place and ran to the cemetery. They ran and they found that tomb and they went inside the tomb. And when they went inside the tomb, Peter got there and all he found was an empty tomb. The linen in which Jesus had been wrapped and that was around his head were folded and laying on that unused tomb. But Jesus didn't appear to them there. And what did they do? They went back and they began to tell the other disciples, he's not there. I think oftentimes when we gather on Easter as a celebration, like we so much like to do, and we like to sing those old favorite hymns, we so much want it to be a celebration. But on that first morning, there wasn't a celebration. There was confusion. There was questions. What did this mean? Disbelief. And they would spend all day now talking about what that meant. They would spend their day, as they had been doing since they had laid him there, talking about what this meant for their future. And now what was a time of defeat was called into question. Called into question. It's okay to question the story, isn't it? And we know now that later that same night, they gathered around a table. As they gathered in that upper room, probably the same place they had celebrated that Passover with him, where he had washed their feet, where he had broke bread with them and handed them bread and said, this is my body broken for you, where he had taken the cup and presented it to them and said, this is my blood shed for you. That very same room was probably where those apostles were hiding with other disciples. And while they were talking, all of a sudden, Jesus was in their midst. Now, I won't pretend to know what that would have been like. It had to have been an amazing experience to be there. I wonder what they did, how they reacted. There was amazement, I'm sure, but I'm guessing there was also fear, for no one had ever risen from the dead. And while they were around Jesus and they clamored for his attention and they wanted to ask so many questions, he told them that they had to wait until the time came. But he would see them again. And he was gone. Probably my favorite part of that story, though, is the story of Thomas, because the Apostle Thomas wasn't there. And when Thomas came back later that evening, they were just like those women that had come running back from the tomb. They gathered around Thomas. Thomas, we've seen the Lord. He's risen. What the women said this morning, he's not there. He was here in our midst. They were so excited. They had a story to tell because Jesus had touched their lives. And what was Thomas's response? Thomas's response was no different than many respond to our message today. Right. Sure he was. I will not believe. I will not believe until I can put my fingers in those holes in his hands, or put my fingers in his side where the spear pierced it. I will not believe. That was Thomas's response. He earned the name Doubting Thomas, but he was not the only one. Those disciples over the next few weeks would see Jesus from time to time. They would be together. Jesus would meet with them and challenge them, continue to teach them. What a powerful story that is. And even today, one often met with disbelief. And I can understand that. But why are we here today? Why can we come to a cemetery and want to celebrate? Because we believe that he's risen from the dead. And the promise was that no matter what, no matter where we had been, what we had done, when we believe and put our trust in Jesus, the risen Lord, even death will not overcome us. That's the story of Easter. That's the story of the empty grave. That's the story that even death could not hold him. And so it cannot hold us who choose to believe. And so while we're not gathered together today as we'd like to be, we're still sharing the story, the good news of Jesus Christ. This Easter, we're not celebrating together physically, but we are together as the church will always be together in the holy name and power of the Holy Spirit in Jesus Christ. And so today, I want to invite you on that journey with me. I want to invite you to go where others fear to go. I don't have all the answers, and neither do you. The disciples, the apostles, they didn't have all the answers. They had lots of questions. And they didn't do everything perfectly from that day forward. As a matter of fact, they went back into hiding. For weeks, they would hide as Jesus prepared them for what was ahead. So what is Jesus preparing you for on this Easter Sunday? What is Jesus challenging you in your faith, in your belief? I want to invite you to, even if you doubt, for if one of the apostles that had spent 3 years of his life with Jesus can have doubts, we can have them too. But the Christian life is about exploring this story that started in an empty tomb in a cemetery outside of Jerusalem. And I'm standing here today in western Pennsylvania telling this story 2,000 years later, because it has been changing lives and giving people things to live for, something they can trust when they are fearful. And so in the midst of our fears today, we do not fear the future. We can face the future unafraid, because the power of Jesus Christ, who overcame the grave, is still with us. And when that is where our trust is, we need not fear anything, because we are given the promise of eternity with our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Happy Easter, and may the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you and bring you peace, not just today, but each day of your life, as we offer this time up in the name of Jesus our Lord.